Rich young men made fun of the police for being a woman on a bus, but when they found out who she was, they were dumbfounded. In the bustling streets of Mexico City, where the aroma of tacos al pastor mingled with exhaust fumes, a woman walked with a firm step and a determined gaze. Guadalupe Hernandez, 35, was an imposing figure in her police uniform, her black hair pulled back in a tight bun and her dark eyes scanning every corner of Reforma Avenue. To those who watched her pass by, Guadalupe was the spitting image of authority and duty, but behind that facade of strength, she hid a story of love, loss, and sacrifice that had haunted her for the past 9 years. Guadalupe had not always been a police officer. In another life, almost a decade ago, she was simply Lupe, a young woman of humble origins who had fallen madly in love with Alejandro Montero, the heir, to one of the most influential families in the Mexican capital. Their love had been intense and passionate, as love in youth usually is, and they soon found themselves married and expecting their first child. Mateo's birth had been the happiest moment in Guadalupe's life. Holding her little boy in her arms with Alejandro by her side, she had believed that nothing could ruin her happiness. How wrong she had been. Alejandro's family, especially his mother, Doña Carmen, had never looked favorably on her son's relationship with a working-class woman. From the beginning, they had done everything possible to separate them, but their love for each other seemed invincible. However, with Mateo's arrival, Doña Carmen saw her chance. Little by little, she poisoned Alejandro's mind, sowing doubts about Guadalupe's ability to be a good mother and wife. She constantly reminded him of her humble origins, insinuating that she could never give Mateo the life a Montero deserved. Alejandro, weak in the face of pressure from his family and his mother's constant manipulations, began to distance himself from Guadalupe. The fights became more frequent, the sleepless nights longer, and the love that once seemed unbreakable began to crumble. The final blow came when Mateo was barely a year old. Taking advantage of her connections and the family fortune, Doña Carmen orchestrated a plan to take custody of Guadalupe. With reputable lawyers and bought witnesses, she painted Guadalupe as a neglectful and unstable mother, unable to provide an adequate home for little Mateo. The day the judge handed down the sentence, awarding full custody to Alejandro, was the day Guadalupe's heart broke into 1,000 pieces. Seeing Doña Carmen smile triumphantly as she carried Mateo in her arms was an image that would haunt her for years to come. Shattered and without the resources to fight the Montero's power, Guadalupe hit rock bottom. But in the depths of her despair, she found a spark of determination. She vowed to herself that someday she would get her son back, that she would once again take her rightful place in Mateo's life. It was then that she decided to enter the police academy. She sought not only stability and respect, but also the opportunity to do justice, to protect those who, like her, had been victims of the powerful. The years at the academy were hard. Guadalupe faced not only the rigorous physical and mental training, but also her own demons. Every night when she closed her eyes, she would see Mateo's face, imagining how he would be growing up without her. But instead of breaking down, he channeled that pain into determination. She graduated with honors from the academy, quickly becoming one of the most respected officers in her unit. Her dedication to her job and her unwavering sense of justice led her to rise quickly through the ranks of the capital's police force. However, despite her professional achievements, Guadalupe never stopped fighting to get Mateo back. Every peso she saved went to pay lawyers. Every free day she spent researching ways to reopen the custody case, but the Monteros were still too powerful, and her attempts always ended in frustrating dead ends. As the years passed, Guadalupe's grief turned into a mixture of sadness and quiet determination. She vowed that, even if it took a lifetime, someday Mateo would learn the truth and understand that his mother had never abandoned him. Guadalupe's life had become a routine of tireless work and lonely nights, until one day, fate decided to intervene in the most unexpected way. It was a Tuesday like any other. Guadalupe was on leave and had decided to take the subway to visit her mother on the outskirts of the city. The carriage was full, as was usual at rush hour, and she was standing, clinging to one of the bars, lost in thought. That's when she heard them. A group of noisy teenagers entered the carriage, laughing and jostling each other. At first, Guadalupe didn't pay much attention to them, used to the hustle and bustle of the city. But something in their voices, in the way they spoke, caught her attention. "Come on, Miguel, I bet you've never been on a subway before," one of the boys exclaimed, elbowing his friend. "Shut up, Javier. My dad would kill me if he knew we were here," replied this Miguel, looking around nervously. Guadalupe watched them discreetly. From their clothes and the way they talked, it was obvious that these boys were not used to using public transportation. They seemed to be in the middle of some kind of mischief or challenge. That's when he saw it. Among the group of boys, there was one who stood a little apart, less noisy than the others. He had dark hair and eyes that Guadalupe felt her heart skip a beat. Those eyes, they were identical to Alejandro's. It couldn't be. It couldn't be. Or could it? 9 years had passed, but Guadalupe would never forget her son's face. And though time had transformed the baby she remembered into a teenager, there was something in his features, in the way he frowned slightly, that screamed, Mateo. Guadalupe froze, not knowing what to do. Should she approach him? What would she say to him? Would he recognize her? 1,000 questions flashed through her mind in a matter of seconds. As she struggled with her indecision, the situation in the carriage began to tense. The boys, emboldened by their adventure, began to tease the other passengers, making comments and laughing raucously. "Hey, old man, don't you have a home to go to?" One of them taunted an older man sitting nearby. Guadalupe felt her blood boil. It was one thing for these privileged boys to play of the people for a day, but quite another for them to disrespect the other passengers. He was about to intervene when the subway stopped at a station and a pregnant woman boarded the car. The woman, visibly tired, looked around for a seat. "Miguel, give her the seat," said the boy. Guadalupe suspected was Mateo. "Are you crazy? It's part of the game, isn't it? Act like we're from here," Miguel replied, laughing. It was the straw that broke the camel's back. Guadalupe could contain herself no longer. "Young man, stand up and give the seat to the lady," she said in a firm voice, approaching the group. The boys looked at her in surprise, clearly not expecting someone to confront them. "And who are you to tell us what to do?" replied Miguel, defiantly. Guadalupe took a deep breath. Even though she was off duty, her police instincts kicked in. "I am someone who knows that the right thing to do is to respect others, especially those who need it most," she replied, remaining calm. "Now, please give up your seat." The tension in the carriage was palpable. The other passengers watched the scene, some with approval of Guadalupe, others with nervousness. It was then that Mateo, or the boy Guadalupe thought was Mateo, stepped forward. "Miguel, do it." "The lady is right," he said, and then, looking at Guadalupe, added, "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to cause trouble." There was something in that look, in the way their eyes met, that made the world stop. For a moment, Guadalupe saw in those eyes a mixture of embarrassment, but also of something more, recognition. Miguel reluctantly got up and gave the seat to the pregnant woman. The tension began to dissipate, but Guadalupe could not take her eyes off Mateo. She wanted to say something, to do something, but the words stuck in her throat. It was Mateo who broke the silence. "Excuse me," he said, approaching Guadalupe. We know each other from somewhere?" Guadalupe's heart skipped a beat. Was it possible that he felt that connection too? She started to say, but was interrupted by the announcement of the next station. Mateo's friends began moving toward the door, calling out to him, "Mateo, come on, this is our stop." Guadalupe felt the world stop Mateo. It was him. There was no doubt. Before she could react, Mateo was dragged out of the carriage by his friends. The last thing Guadalupe saw was his confused face looking back before the doors closed. The subway started up, taking Guadalupe away from her newfound son. She clung to the bar, feeling her legs give out. After 9 years, she had seen Mateo. She had talked to him. And now, once again, she had lost him. But this time it was different. This time he knew Mateo was in town, and more importantly, it seemed that a part of him had recognized her as well. With trembling hands, Guadalupe pulled out her phone. She had some calls to make. The search she had abandoned years ago was rekindled with renewed strength. This time, she vowed, she would let nothing and no one come between her and her son. The story isn't over yet, but if you listened this far, it's because you're liking it. So please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you live. Back to the story. The next few days were an emotional roller coaster for Guadalupe. On the one hand, the joy of having seen Mateo, of knowing that he was well and had become an educated and conscientious young man, filled her with pride. On the other hand, the frustration of not being able to get close to him, of not being able to explain everything that had happened, consumed her. Guadalupe channeled all that energy into her work and her personal investigation. Using her contacts in the police and her detective skills, she began to track the Monteros' movements. She discovered that Alejandro was now a successful businessman, Mateo was attending a prestigious private school in the most exclusive area of the city, and Doña Carmen was still a prominent figure in the social circles of the Mexican elite. But what most caught her attention was a seemingly insignificant detail. Mateo was part of his school's swimming team. This little tidbit of information awakened a distant memory in Guadalupe. When she was pregnant, she used to joke with Alejandro about how her son would be a great swimmer, as he never seemed to sit still in her belly. With this information, Guadalupe made a plan. She knew she couldn't just show up at Mateo's school or at the Monteros' house. She needed a more subtle approach, a way to get closer to her son without alerting Alejandro or Doña Carmen. That's when fate intervened again. Guadalupe's unit received a tip about a series of petty thefts in the area where Mateo's school was located. Although it was not her usual jurisdiction, Guadalupe volunteered to lead the investigation over the next few weeks. Guadalupe patrolled the area frequently, ever vigilant, hoping to catch a glimpse of Mateo. And finally, one Wednesday afternoon, she spotted him. Was leaving school with his friends, among them the same Miguel from the subway incident. Guadalupe watched them from afar, feeling a mixture of love and pain to see her son laughing and joking with his friends. She was about to leave when she noticed something strange. A man dressed casually but clearly out of place seemed to be following the group of boys. Her police instincts kicked in immediately. Without a second thought, Guadalupe began to follow the suspect, keeping a safe distance. The boys, oblivious to what was happening, stopped at a cafe. The man stood outside, pretending to look at his phone, but Guadalupe could see that he did not look away from the group. She decided to act. She approached the man, flashing her badge. "Police, may I ask what you are doing here?" she said in a firm voice. The man startled, clearly surprised. I'm just waiting for someone," he stammered. "And does that someone happen to be one of those guys from the cafe?" Guadalupe kept her gaze fixed on the man, who began to sweat visibly. "Sir, I suggest you tell me the truth. Why are you following those boys?" The man, cornered, finally confessed, "Look, officer, I'm just following orders. I was hired to keep an eye on the Montero boy, Mateo. I don't know any more details. I'm just paid to report his movements." This revelation shook Guadalupe. Who would be interested in following Mateo? Would it be Doña Carmen distrusting her own grandson? Or was there something more sinister at play? "He's coming with me to the police station for a formal interrogation," Guadalupe said, trying to remain calm despite the storm of emotions raging inside her. As she handcuffed the man, Guadalupe saw out of the corner of her eye that Mateo and his friends were leaving the cafe. For a moment their gazes met. Guadalupe saw a flash of recognition in her son's eyes, followed by confusion. "Officer?" called Mateo, approaching cautiously. "Are you the same one from the subway?" Guadalupe felt her heart skip a beat. "Yes, it's me," she replied, struggling to maintain a professional tone. "What's going on? Did this man do something wrong?" asked Mateo, looking at the suspect curiously. "It's a police matter, young man," Guadalupe replied, aware that she could not reveal the true nature of the situation. The best thing is for you and your friends to go home. Mateo nodded, but did not move. There was something in his eyes, a mixture of curiosity and something deeper that kept Guadalupe pinned in place, you know, Mateo finally said. Ever since I saw her on the subway, I've had this strange feeling like I know her from somewhere. Guadalupe felt a lump form in her throat. How could she answer that without revealing everything? Sometimes, she said carefully, our instincts tell us things our minds can't explain. Matthew stared at her, as if trying to decipher a riddle. Yeah, I guess so, he muttered. At that moment, Mateo's phone rang. It was Alejandro asking where he was. I have to go, Mateo said, still looking at Guadalupe with a mixture of curiosity and confusion. But may I ask your name? Guadalupe, she replied, feeling like each letter weighed a ton. Officer Guadalupe Hernandez. Mateo nodded slowly. Thank you, Officer Hernandez, for the subway thing and for whatever it is you're doing right now. As she watched Mateo walk away with his friends, Guadalupe felt such an intense mix of emotions that she could barely breathe. She had been so close to her son, had talked to him, and yet she still felt so far away. The next few days were a whirlwind. The interrogation of the man following Mateo revealed that he had been hired by a private investigator agency, but he refused to reveal who the client was. Guadalupe suspected that Doña Carmen was behind everything, but had no proof. Meanwhile, Mateo's image, his voice, the way he had looked at her, kept replaying in Guadalupe's mind. She knew she had to do something, that she could not let this opportunity pass. After much deliberation, Guadalupe made a risky decision. Using her contacts in the police, she managed to get Mateo's email address. With her heart in her hand, she wrote him a message. Dear Mateo, I know this may seem strange, but I am the officer you met on the subway and then outside the cafe. There is something important I need to discuss with you. If you are willing, I would like to meet at a public place of your choice. I understand if this makes you uncomfortable, and I will respect your decision if you prefer not to. Sincerely, Officer Guadalupe Hernandez. After sending the mail, Guadalupe felt like she was on the edge of a cliff. Had she done the right thing? How would Mateo react? The answer came 2 days later when Guadalupe was in the middle of her shift. Officer Hernandez, your message surprised me, but I must admit it also intrigued me. There is something about you that seems familiar, although I can't explain why. If you still want to meet, I will be at Chapultepec Park this Saturday at 3 p.m. near the main fountain. Mateo Montero. Guadalupe read the message over and over, feeling a mixture of excitement and terror. This was the moment she had been waiting for 9 years, the chance to talk to her son, to explain the truth. But was she really ready? Saturday came faster than Guadalupe would have liked. She dressed in casual clothes, trying not to look like the cop she was. When she arrived at the park, she saw Mateo sitting on a bench near the fountain, nervously looking around. Taking a deep breath, Guadalupe walked over. Hola, Mateo, she said softly. Mateo looked at her, a mixture of curiosity and apprehension in his eyes. Officer Hernandez, he replied, standing up. You can call me Guadalupe, she said, feeling her heart pounding so hard she feared Mateo might hear it. They sat on the bench, an awkward silence between them. Finally, Mateo spoke. What did you want to talk to me about? Guadalupe closed her eyes for a moment, gathering all her courage. When she opened them, she looked directly into her son's eyes. Mateo, she began, her voice barely a whisper. There is something you need to know. Something about your past, about your, family, about me. And so, sitting on that bench in Chapultepec Park, with the sound of the fountain in the background and the bustle of the city around them, Guadalupe began to tell the story she had held in her heart for 9 long years. The story of a young girl in love, of an adored baby, of a powerful family, and of the lies that had separated them. The story of a mother who never stopped fighting, who became a policeman to find the strength and the means to get her son back. As she spoke, Guadalupe saw emotions cross Mateo's face. Surprise, disbelief, anger, and finally, a mixture of confusion and longing. "You are you, my mother?" asked Mateo, his voice trembling. Guadalupe nodded, tears running freely down her cheeks. "Yes, Mateo, I am your mother, and I never, not for a second, stopped loving you or fighting for you." What happened next would change the course of their lives forever. But that, as they say, is another story. The story isn't over yet, but if you listened this far, it's because you're liking it. So please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you live. Back to the story. The silence that followed Guadalupe's revelation seemed to stretch on forever. Mateo stared at her, his eyes a storm of mixed emotions. Guadalupe could see the conflict on his face, the struggle between what he had always believed and this new truth he had just discovered. "No, it can't be true," Mateo finally murmured, his voice barely audible. "My father, my grandmother, they told me that my mother had abandoned us, that she didn't care about us." Guadalupe's heart broke at those words. "Oh, Mateo," she said softly, resisting the urge to hug her son. "That's not true. I never abandoned you. They took me from you, took your custody from me, using their money and influence." Matthew stood abruptly, running his hands through his hair in a gesture of frustration. "Why should I believe you? I don't know you. You've been a stranger all my life." Guadalupe stood up as well, but kept her distance, mindful not to push too hard. "You're right, Mateo. You don't know me. And I understand this is hard to believe, but I have proof, documents, photos, witnesses. If you give me the chance, I can show you the truth." Mateo looked at her, a mixture of doubt and longing in his eyes. I need time to process this. It's too much." Guadalupe nodded, understanding perfectly how overwhelming all of this must be for him. "I understand. Take as much time as you need. I'll be here when you're ready to talk again." He pulled a card from his pocket and handed it to Mateo. "This is my number. You can call me or write me any time, for anything." Mateo took the card with trembling hands. For a moment it looked like he was going to say something else, but then he simply nodded and walked quickly away, leaving Guadalupe alone by the fountain. The next few days were agony for Guadalupe. Every time her phone rang, her heart leapt, hoping it was Mateo. But the days turned into weeks, and the silence became deafening. Meanwhile, Guadalupe couldn't stop thinking about the man who had been following Mateo, who had hired him, and why. Her instinct told her that there was more at stake than it seemed. Determined to get to the bottom of the matter, Guadalupe began to investigate on her own. Using her contacts in the police and her detective skills, she began to unravel a complex web of lies and secrets surrounding the Montero family. What she discovered stunned her. It turned out that Doña Carmen, Mateo's grandmother, was involved in a corruption scheme that extended to the highest levels of government. The private investigator had been hired not to keep an eye on Mateo, but to make sure the boy did not accidentally discover his grandmother's illicit activities. Guadalupe found herself in an ethical dilemma. On the one hand, she had information that could help her regain custody of Mateo. She could use this as leverage against the Monteros. But on the other hand, as a police officer, she had a duty to report these crimes. As she wrestled with this decision, she received a text message that made her world stop. "We need to talk tomorrow, same place, same time." Mateo, Guadalupe's heart was turned upside down. Finally, after weeks of silence, Mateo wanted to see her. But what would he tell her? Should she tell him about her discoveries? When she arrived at the park the next day, she found Mateo already. Waiting for her, he looked different, more mature somehow, as if the last few weeks had aged him years. "I've been doing some research," Mateo said without preamble. As soon as Guadalupe sat down, "I talked to old employees at the house, went through old documents, and I think I owe you an apology." "You were right about everything." Guadalupe felt a lump form in her throat. "Oh, que Mateo," she whispered. "But there's more," Mateo continued, his voice trembling slightly. "I think my grandmother is involved in something illegal. I've seen documents, overheard conversations. I'm not sure exactly what it's about, but I know it's nothing good." Guadalupe closed her eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of her own discoveries. When she opened them, she looked directly at her son. "Mateo," she said softly, "there is something I need to tell you. Something I've discovered in my investigations as a policeman, and so, sitting on that park bench, mother and son began to share their discoveries, piecing together a puzzle that was much larger and more complex than either had imagined. As they talked, Guadalupe realized that this situation was about much more than getting her son back. It was about doing the right thing, about standing up to corruption and injustice, even if that meant putting her own happiness at risk. "What are we going to do?" asked Mateo finally, his voice a mixture of fear and determination. Guadalupe took her son's hand, feeling for the first time in years the connection that should have always existed between them. "We're going to do the right thing," she said firmly. "Together." And so mother and son embarked on a dangerous game of cat and mouse with some of Mexico's most powerful and corrupt individuals. They knew the road ahead would be difficult and dangerous, but they also knew they had something their opponents did not: truth and a mother's unconditional love for her son. As they walked away from the park, hand in hand, Guadalupe felt a mixture of fear and hope. She didn't know what the future held for them, but for the first time in 9 years, she felt she was finally whole. She had her son back, and together they could face whatever fate would throw at them. The fight was just beginning. But Guadalupe knew that no matter what happened, she had already won the most important battle of all. She had her son back, and with him, the chance to be the mother she had always wanted to be. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Guadalupe and Mateo worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and building a solid case against Doña Carmen and her accomplices. Each new piece of information they uncovered brought them closer to the truth, but also increased the danger they faced. Meanwhile, the relationship between mother and son blossomed. Every moment together was an opportunity to make up for lost time. Guadalupe listened avidly to stories of Mateo's childhood, her heart aching for the moments she had missed, but grateful that she could be a part of his life now. One night, as they were going through documents in Guadalupe's small apartment, Mateo paused and looked at his mother curiously. "Mom," he said, the word still sounding new on his lips, "how could you keep fighting all these years? How could you not give up?" Guadalupe felt a lump form in her throat. "Oh, Mateo," she answered softly. "There were moments when I wanted to give up, moments when the pain was almost unbearable. But every time I thought of you, of your smile, of how it felt to hold you in my arms when you were a baby, it gave me the strength to keep going. A mother's love is the most powerful force there is." Mateo nodded, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm sorry I doubted you at first." Guadalupe reached out and gently stroked her son's cheek. "You have nothing to apologize for, my love. The important thing is that we are together now." That moment of tenderness was interrupted by the shrill ringing of Guadalupe's phone. It was Carlos, her partner in the police force. "Lupe, we have a problem," Carlos said, his voice strained. "Someone has been asking questions about you and your investigation. I think the Monteros suspect something." Guadalupe felt her blood run cold. She looked at Mateo, who was watching her with concern. "I understand, Carlos." "Thank you for warning me," he replied, trying to remain calm. "We'll take precautions." After hanging up, Guadalupe explained the situation to Mateo. "We need to accelerate our plan," she said. "We can't wait any longer." Mateo nodded, his face a mask of determination. "What do we do now?" "We're going to take all our evidence to the Attorney General," Guadalupe replied. "It's risky, but it's our best chance to expose the truth and make sure justice is served." The next few days were a race against time. Guadalupe and Mateo worked day and night, organizing their evidence and preparing to present their case. They knew they were playing a dangerous game, but truth and justice were on their side. Finally, the day of the meeting with the Attorney General arrived. As they made their way to the prosecutor's office, Guadalupe couldn't help but feel a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. This was the moment they had been waiting for, the opportunity to expose corruption and clear their names. However, when they arrived at the prosecutor's office building, something did not seem right. There was too much activity, too many guards. "Something's not right," Guadalupe muttered, her police instincts on high alert. Just then, they saw Alejandro leaving the building, accompanied by Doña Carmen and a group of men in expensive suits. Mateo tensed at her side. What are they doing here? Before Guadalupe could answer, they were surrounded by a group of officers. Officer Guadalupe Hernandez, one of them, said, "You are under arrest for obstruction of justice and falsifying evidence." Guadalupe felt the world stop. She looked at Mateo, whose eyes were filled with fear and confusion. "Mateo, listen to me," she said quickly as the officers approached. "Whatever happens, remember that I love you, and remember that the truth always comes out. Don't give up." As the officers handcuffed her, Guadalupe saw Doña Carmen smiling triumphantly from afar. But what hurt her most was seeing Alejandro, Mateo's father, watching the scene with an expression of guilt and conflict. As she was being bundled into the police car, Guadalupe kept her eyes fixed on Mateo, who was being restrained by other officers. Despite the chaos surrounding them, mother and son shared a look of understanding and determination. This was not the end. It was just another obstacle on their path to justice and truth, and together they would find a way to overcome it. As the car drove away, Guadalupe closed her eyes and took a deep breath. The battle was not yet over. In fact, it was just beginning, and she was ready to fight, not only for herself but for her son and for the justice they both deserved. The story isn't over yet, but if you listened this far, it's because you're liking it. So please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you live. Back to the story. The days following Guadalupe's arrest were a whirlwind of confusion and despair for Mateo. Forced to return to the Montero mansion, he felt like a prisoner in what he had once considered his home. Every corner of the house reminded him of the lies in which he had grown up, and the absence of his newfound mother was a constant ache in his heart. Doña Carmen, seemingly victorious, maintained a facade of concern and love, but Mateo could see right through her now. Every kind gesture, every sweet word, rang false and manipulative to his ears. Alejandro, for his part, looked like a tormented man. Matthew watched him with a mixture of anger and pity, watching his father struggle with the guilt of his past actions. Meanwhile, in a cold and lonely cell, Guadalupe refused to give up. She knew the accusations against her were false, fabricated by the Monteros to discredit her, but she also knew that the truth was on her side and that she had an invaluable ally in her son. Despite the Monteros' attempts to keep them apart, Mateo managed to send a secret message to his mother through Carlos, Guadalupe's partner on the police force, who had remained loyal to her. "Mom, I haven't given up. I'm looking for a way to help you. Trust me." Those words were a ray of hope for Guadalupe in her dark cell. Her son not only believed her, but he was willing to fight for her. That gave her the strength to go on. Mateo, for his part, became a detective in his own right. Taking advantage of his position within the Montero household, he began to search for evidence that could exonerate his mother and expose his grandmother's corruption. One night, while everyone was asleep, Mateo slipped into Doña Carmen's study. With his heart pounding, he began going through the files and documents his grandmother jealously guarded. It was then that he found him. Hidden in a secret compartment of the desk was a flash drive. With trembling hands, Mateo plugged it into the computer and began to review its contents. What he saw took his breath away. The flash drive contained irrefutable evidence of Doña Carmen's corruption, records of bribes, money laundering schemes, even evidence of blackmail of high-ranking officials. But most shocking was a document detailing the plan to separate Guadalupe from her son 9 years ago. With his heart racing and his hands shaking, Mateo quickly copied all the information onto another flash drive he had brought with him. Just as he was about to finish, he heard footsteps in the hallway. He quickly unplugged the flash drive and hid it in his pocket. He barely had time to close the computer and hide behind the curtains when the door opened. It was Alejandro. Mateo held his breath as he watched his father enter the room, looking tired and dejected. To his surprise, Alejandro went straight to the desk and pulled the original flash drive out of the secret compartment. "I can't do this anymore," Alejandro muttered to himself. I have to do the right thing." Mateo watched silently as his father walked out of the room with the flash drive in his hand. Once alone, he emerged from his hiding place, his mind working at full speed. What was Alejandro planning to do? Wasting no time, Mateo crept out of the house and headed for the police station. He knew it was risky, but he had to act fast when he arrived. He asked to speak to Carlos. "I have proof," Mateo said breathlessly, handing the flash drive to Carlos. "This proves my mother's innocence and the corruption of the Monteros." Carlos quickly reviewed the contents of the flash drive, his eyes growing wider and wider as he realized the magnitude of the evidence. "This is incredible," he finally said. "With this, we can not only free your mother, but also bring down the entire network of corruption." Just then, the office door burst open. To everyone's surprise, it was Alejandro, holding the original flash drive. "I came to confess," Alejandro said, his voice cracking with emotion. "And to deliver this," he held up the flash drive. Mateo looked at his father, a mixture of emotions crossing his face. Alejandro looked back at him, his eyes full of regret and determination. "I'm sorry, son," he said softly. "I know I can't undo the damage I've caused, but I can try to make it right now." The events that followed were a whirlwind. With the evidence provided by Mateo and Alejandro's confession, the authorities acted quickly. Doña Carmen and her accomplices were arrested, and Guadalupe was released with all charges against her dropped. The reunion between Guadalupe and Mateo was emotional. Mother and son embraced, tears of joy and relief running down their cheeks. "We made it, Mum," Mateo whispered. "We're together again." Guadalupe nodded, unable to speak out of emotion. Finally, after 9 long years, she had her son back in her arms. But the story did not end there. There were still many wounds to heal, many truths to face. Alejandro, repentant of his past actions, sought forgiveness and the opportunity to be part of his son's life. Guadalupe, meanwhile, struggled with mixed feelings toward the man she once loved and who had caused her so much pain. And in the midst of it all, there was Mateo, trying to reconcile his past with his present, learning to know the mother who had been taken from him and the father who now sought redemption. As the three sat together in the police station interrogation room, exhausted but relieved, Guadalupe looked at her son and then at Alejandro. "We have a lot to talk about," she said softly, "and a long way to go. But the important thing is that we are here, together, and this time nothing and no one will separate us." Mateo nodded, taking his mother's hand and looking at his father. "We're a family," he said, "a complicated, slightly broken family, but a family nonetheless, and together we can get through anything." As the sun began to peek through the window, marking the start of a new day, the three felt it was also the start of a new chapter in their lives. A chapter full of challenges, no doubt, but also full of hope, love, and the promise of a future together. The story isn't over yet, but if you listened this far, it's because you're liking it. So please consider subscribing to the channel and commenting where you live. Coming back to the story. The months that followed were a period of adjustment and healing for Guadalupe, Mateo, and Alejandro. Each day brought new challenges, but also new opportunities to rebuild the family bonds that had been broken for so long. Guadalupe, exonerated of all charges and reinstated in her position with the police, dedicated herself not only to her work, but also to making up for lost time with her son. Every spare moment was spent with Mateo, listening to his stories, sharing her own and creating new memories together. Mateo, for his part, was navigating uncharted waters. On the one hand, he was elated to finally have his mother in his life, to learn the truth about his past. On the other hand, he was dealing with complicated feelings towards his father and grandmother, trying to reconcile the love he felt for them with the betrayal they had committed. Alejandro, aware of the damage he had caused, struggled every day to earn his son's and Guadalupe's forgiveness. He attended therapy, had completely distanced himself from his mother's corrupt activities, and sought ways to make up for the lost years. One day, as the three of them shared dinner in Guadalupe's small apartment, Alejandro made a surprising proposal. "I've been thinking," Alejandro began, his voice shaky but determined. "I want to use my family's fortune to do something good. I was thinking of creating a foundation to help families unjustly separated by the legal system so that no one else has to go through what we went through." Guadalupe and Mateo exchanged surprised looks. This proposal was unexpected, but both could see the sincerity in Alejandro's eyes. That would be wonderful," Guadalupe said after a moment. "We could help so many families." Mateo nodded, a small smile forming on his lips. "I like the idea, Papa. It's a way to turn all this pain into something positive." Thus, the Hernandez Montero Family Reunification Foundation was born. In the months that followed, the three worked tirelessly to establish the organization, each bringing their unique skills to bear. Guadalupe used her contacts in law enforcement and her knowledge of the legal system. Alejandro brought his financial resources and business connections, and Mateo, with his unique perspective as someone who had lived through separation, became a powerful spokesperson for the cause. The foundation soon began to have a real impact. Families who had been separated by unjust circumstances were finding hope and support. Guadalupe, Mateo, and Alejandro worked together to provide legal assistance, emotional support, and financial resources to those in need. One day, while reviewing the case of a young mother struggling to get her son back, Mateo stopped and looked at his parents. "You know, I never thought I would say this, but I'm grateful for everything we went through," he said, Guadalupe, and Alejandro looked at him in surprise. "Don't get me wrong," Mateo continued. "What happened was terrible and I wouldn't wish it on anyone, but look at what we have accomplished. We are helping people who are going through what we went through. We are making a difference." Guadalupe smiled, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You're right, mi amor. Somehow we've managed to turn our pain into something beautiful." Alejandro nodded, his face reflecting a mixture of regret and hope, "and we will continue to do so together." As time passed, the relationship between the three continued to evolve. Guadalupe and Alejandro never became a romantic couple again, but they developed a deep mutual respect and friendship based on their shared love for Mateo and their commitment to the foundation. Mateo, for his part, blossomed. The young man who had once been trapped in lies and secrets became a strong and compassionate man, dedicated to helping others and keeping his unconventional family together. A year after the foundation was established, they organized a fundraising gala benefit. As Mateo gave an emotional speech about the importance of family unity and justice, Guadalupe and Alejandro watched from the audience, their hearts bursting with pride. "We did well, didn't we?" whispered Alejandro to Guadalupe. She nodded, her eyes fixed on her son. "Yes, we did. In spite of everything, we did well." That night, as the three shared a group hug after the event, Guadalupe realized they had accomplished something extraordinary. Not only had they healed their own wounds, but they had created something that would help heal the wounds of others. Life was not perfect. There were still difficult days, moments of doubt and conflict, but now they faced those challenges together, like the family they always should have been. As they drove home that night, Guadalupe looked at her son and her son's father and felt a deep sense of peace. The road had been long and difficult, but they had finally arrived where they were meant to be. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" asked Mateo, noticing her thoughtful look. Guadalupe smiled, taking her son's hand. "I think about how lucky we are, my love. In how, despite everything, we have found our way back to each other, and how together we are making the world a little better place." Alexander nodded, his face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and determination. "And we will continue to do so, day after day." Mateo smiled, looking at his parents. "We're an unconventional family, aren't we?" "We are," Guadalupe replied with a chuckle, "but that makes us special." As the car sped through the nighttime streets of Mexico City, the three felt a deep sense of belonging. They had been through the fire and had emerged stronger, wiser and more united than ever. And though they knew the road ahead would still have its challenges, they were ready to face them. Together, as the family they always should have been. The story isn't over yet, but if you listened this far, it's because you're liking it, so please consider subscribing to the channel and comment where you live. Back to the story. 5 years had passed since the night of the benefit gala, and the Hernandez Montero Foundation had become a powerful force in the fight for family justice in Mexico. Guadalupe, now 40, had risen to head her unit in the police, using her position to push for reforms in the system. Alejandro had left the business world entirely behind to devote himself full-time to the foundation. And Mateo, at 23, was finishing his law degree, determined to follow in his mother's footsteps in the fight for justice. One sunny Sunday afternoon, the quirky family gathered in Chapultepec Park, the same place where years earlier Guadalupe and Mateo had had their emotional reunion. As they shared a picnic, Mateo seemed nervous, fiddling with the edge of his napkin. "What's wrong, mi amor?" asked Guadalupe, noticing her son's restlessness. Mateo took a deep breath. "There's something I want to tell you," he said, looking at his parents. "I've been thinking a lot about my future, about what I want to do after I graduate." Alejandro and Guadalupe exchanged curious glances. "I want to expand our work," Mateo continued. "Not just in Mexico, but internationally. I've been in contact with similar organizations in other Latin American countries, and I think we could create a support network for families throughout the region." Guadalupe felt tears of pride well up in her eyes. "Oh, Mateo," she said softly, "that's wonderful." Alejandro nodded, a broad smile on his face. "It's a brilliant idea, son, and you have our full support." Mateo smiled, clearly relieved by his parents' positive reaction. "There's more," he said. "I've met someone special." Guadalupe and Alejandro exchanged surprised looks. "Her name is Sofia," Mateo continued. "She's a volunteer at the foundation we met a few months ago, and well, I think she's the one." "Oh, mi amor," Guadalupe said, hugging her son. "I'm so happy for you." Alejandro patted Mateo's back. "That's wonderful, son. When do we get to meet her?" "Actually," Mateo said, looking at his watch, "she should be here any minute. I invited her to join us." Just then, a dark-haired, bright-eyed young woman approached. The group Mateo stood up to greet her, his face lighting up in a way Guadalupe had never seen before. "Mom, Dad," Mateo said, taking the young woman's hand. "This is Sofia." As Guadalupe and Alejandro stood up to greet Sofia, Guadalupe felt a surge of emotions. To see her son so happy, so complete, was everything she had always wanted for him. The afternoon passed amid laughter and lively conversation. Sofia turned out to be an intelligent and compassionate young woman, clearly dedicated to the same kind of work Mateo was passionate about. Guadalupe couldn't help but notice how her eyes sparkled every time she looked at her son. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Guadalupe found herself watching her family. Alejandro, the man who had once hurt her deeply, now became an ally and friend. Mateo, her beloved son, grown and blossoming, finding his own path in life. And now Sofia, a new addition who promised to bring even more love and joy into their lives. At that moment, Guadalupe realized that her story had reached a new chapter. A chapter filled with hope, new beginnings, and a bright future. "What are you thinking about, Mom?" asked Mateo, noticing her distant look. Guadalupe smiled, her eyes shining with happy tears. "I think about how far we've come, my love. In how, despite all the obstacles, we've built something beautiful together." Alexander nodded, his face reflecting a mixture of gratitude and peace. "And in how we will continue to build, not just for ourselves, but for all those we can help." Mateo took Sofia's hand, looking at his parents with a smile. "We are an unconventional family," he said, repeating the words he had said years ago, "but that makes us special. And now," Sofia added softly, "I'm honored to be a part of it." As the sun set over Chapultepec Park, the Hernandez Montero family, with their new addition, embraced. They had been through so much, had overcome so many obstacles. And here they were, stronger and more united than ever. Guadalupe looked around at the families enjoying the park and thought of all the lives they had touched through their foundation. She thought of all the families who still needed help and the work that still needed to be done. But as she looked at her son, Alejandro, and now Sofia, Guadalupe knew they were prepared for whatever challenges the future might bring. For now they had the most important thing, the love and mutual support of a true family. And so as the sky darkened and the first stars began to shine, Guadalupe felt a deep sense of peace and gratitude. Her journey had been long and difficult, but every step, every tear, every moment of doubt had been worth it to reach this moment. A moment of love, of unity, of hope. A moment that promised a bright future not only for them, but for all the families they could help along the way. And as they packed their things to return home, Guadalupe knew that this was not the end of their story. It was just the beginning of a new and exciting chapter, a chapter they would write together as the family they were always meant to be.